All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm Vicki Walgast, president of the South Kansas City Chamber of Commerce, and we're excited to be able to present a candidates forum this afternoon for all of the districts that are part of the South Kansas City and the Grandview Chambers of Commerce service area. Election is August 4th, and we've got a lot of great races. So wanted to give everybody an opportunity to meet our candidates and learn a little bit more about them. At this time, I'm going to turn the program over to Zach Sweets. Zach is from Evergy, and he serves as the chairperson for our Government Affairs Committee, and he's going to moderate our program today. Zach, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vicki, and thanks everybody for tuning in to this candidate's first ever virtual candidates forum here. And just real quick, so everyone kind of knows the lay of the land and the groundwork here, the rules with what each candidate will have about 2 minutes to really introduce themselves and also include any issues that are important to them. And following that 2 minutes, we have some questions from the Chamber's Government Affairs Committee that they have prepared, and we're ready to hear each candidate's thoughts, but we're going to give each candidate just about a minute. We know candidates, we know what you're running for. So we'll give them about a minute and only a minute to answer those questions, but we will have time, well, time permitting, we will have a Q&A section from where all of you who are tuned in tonight can enter in your questions in the chat feature, and we will get through as many as time permits. We do have Angela with us. Angela will be our timekeeper, and Angela is the one to fear candidates, so keep an eye on her. She will be letting you know when you have a minute, 30 seconds, and time is done, so keep an eye on Angela. So let's go ahead and start. We have from District 20, or running for District 25, Democratic seat there, or the Democratic primary, we have Drew Rogers and Patty Lewis, who's also with us. Drew, Patty, please go ahead, and I guess we'll start with Patty here. Give us a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself.
Yeah, great, thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank the South Kansas City and Grandview Chamber for hosting this forum, and for all of you joining today, taking time out of your busy schedules to learn more about the candidates. Thank you so much. My name is Patty Lewis, and I'm running for Missouri House District 25. I've been in healthcare for 20 years as an ICU nurse and as a healthcare executive. I've been advocating for people my entire professional career, from the most vulnerable patients in the hospital to the teams I've led. I'm an experienced leader who knows how to get things done, and I do not shy away from a challenge. I was born and raised here in Kansas City, Missouri, and grew up in South Kansas City, and I've been involved in community service my entire life. I decided to run for state rep because I'm extremely concerned with what's happening in our state. Poor legislation and policies in place are leaving folks behind. They're failing us, and I feel compelled to advocate for you and all Missourians and fight for a better future for us all. The number one issue I'm hearing from voters that I talk to every single day is healthcare. Even prior to the pandemic, with the failure to expand Medicaid, hospitals closing, and now the lack of leadership to handle the pandemic, our one and only nurse in the house has actually termed out, and I find that very concerning, especially now. We need more representation from folks who have real-world experiences with the issues we are facing. I look forward to sharing more about myself today, and I know time is limited, so please visit my website, pattyformo.com. That's PATTYFORMO.com.
Thank you, Patty. Next, we'll go to Drew Rogers. Drew?
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Chambers for hosting me. And I just want to piggyback on what Patty was saying. We face unprecedented times here in Missouri. Our campaign is built on giving Missourians the tools they need to succeed. I believe those things are access to healthcare and education, better wages, and more affordable housing. as Patty said, too many people are being left behind in Missouri due to the supermajorities in the legislature, made up of Republicans in both the House and the Senate. That's going to lead to some significant challenges for Democratic representatives who want to go down to Jefferson City and make a difference, which we all do. So building my platform around those 4 issues, we wanted to target issues that we believe we can make some progress on for the people of Missouri, despite the significant political challenges we're going to face in accomplishing them. In education, we need to make sure that we have access to excellent pre-K options throughout the state. We need to expand universal pre-K in Missouri. We also need to provide funding for programs such as Parents as Teachers and Start at Zero, which work with children as soon as they leave the hospital and those children's parents to ensure they have the tools to succeed in kindergarten as soon as they start. We build prisons based on our 3rd grade reading levels, and our 3rd grade reading levels are heavily predicted based on kindergarten readiness. We need to be doing everything we can in the first 5 years of a child's life to ensure that they have the tools necessary to succeed. And I'm going to be expanding on that a little bit later in this program when we talk about education. Also, we face an enormous criminal justice opportunity to reform criminal justice, and I look forward to advocating on behalf of Kansas City in that, using my experience as an attorney to do so. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Zach.
All right, thank you, Drew. Drew and Patty are definitely already on the right path. They are following time limits on speaking, which they'll have if successful. But we'll go ahead and go on to answering or asking some questions of both of you. And I'll go ahead and ask the question, and this time I'll let Drew go first. But the question is, what actions do you think the state should take that would be the most effective in reducing the city's sharply rising homicide rate?
Yeah, so it's pretty honestly predictable to see in this time of extreme crisis that violence was going to rise sharply. We need to tackle this issue 3 different ways. There's the short, the medium, and the long-term game to solving an issue with gun violence and violence in general. In the short term, we need better gun safety laws. I support gun sense legislation. We need increased background checks. We need red flag laws to prevent folks from committing violence when they're exhibiting signs that they may. The medium term is we need to provide opportunity to Missourians. We need to increase access to jobs. And the long-term view towards solving the gun violence epidemic is we need more education. I was hoping I was going to have a little more time to elaborate on what we need to do. But like I mentioned earlier, it starts with kindergarten readiness, and it goes further as you grow older to ensure access to quality high school education and not pricing folks out of higher education. And I'll stop there.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was muted. Patty, what do you think? What actions should the state take that would be the most effective in reducing the homicide rate in Kansas City?
Yeah, thank you, Zach. I think the first thing we need is local control of our police department. You know, this dates back to the Pendergast years, and a lot has changed since then. We need oversight and transparency. We also need to give our police the tools to be successful, like de-escalation training. Second of all, we need smart, sensible gun legislation. Our state has some of the loosest gun laws in the country. As an ICU nurse who worked at a trauma center, I took care of so many patients who were victims of gun violence, and I saw firsthand the impact it has on them and their families. I'm a proud volunteer with Moms Demand Action. Last February, I joined mom volunteers from across the state on Lobby Day advocating for smart, sensible gun reform. And that's something I will continue to do as your state representative. And I'm pleased to share with you that I have received the Moms Demand Action Gun Sense Candidate Distinction.
Thank you, Patty. We're actually going to stick with you going to the next question. And that question is, given the dire needs of both physical and behavioral health care in these times, at least, and especially before, what is your position on Amendment 2, and how did you come to that conclusion?
Thank you, Zach. Well, I support, 100% support Amendment 2, Medicaid expansion. I believe accessible, affordable healthcare is something that all Missourians deserve. I believe healthcare is a right, not a privilege. I took care of so many patients who were admitted to the ICU because they didn't have access to preventative healthcare services or could not afford their prescription medications. Medicaid expansion will provide healthcare coverage to over 250,000 Missourians. It will keep our hospitals open and bring our tax dollars home. I encourage everyone to vote yes on 2.
And Drew, thank you, Patty. Drew, when we're looking at Amendment 2, which is, excuse me, I forgot to mention before, Medicaid expansion, do you support that proposition, and why?
Absolutely do support it. And it's pretty simple why. We need our tax dollars coming home to Missouri, and we need to be providing healthcare for as many Missourians as possible. I also agree that universal healthcare is the ideal for Missouri. We need to ensure that every single Missourian has access to healthcare. Medicaid expansion does that for upwards of 200,000 Missourians. So it's a no-brainer to support it. How I came to the conclusion is I believe that healthcare is a right. And because we're spending tax dollars at the federal level, we should be getting the benefit from those dollars and bringing them home to Missouri to prop up rural hospitals, to provide access to care for those who are working currently. That's what Medicaid expansion does. It's going to increase the people who qualify for Medicaid expansion for those who earn up to 125% of the poverty level. That necessitates that they're actually working. So I'm always confused when Republicans talk about providing care for people who aren't working, because they are. And everyone deserves health care anyway.
Zach, you're muted.
We'll stick with you, Drew, as we bounce back and forth here. And the next question, we're actually getting towards education. And, you know, there have been considerable effort over the last, decade, it feels, and more, to expand charter schools in districts outside of Kansas City and St. Louis. While this does have benefits and innovation, we do see that they create a duplication of administrative costs and overhead for smaller districts. So when we're looking at both rural and urban districts, they sometimes don't have a large enough tax base to support these schools. What kind of a compromise, a solution, would you propose to resolve this conflict, this constant tension that the state is continually having a conversation about?
Well, I don't know that I could come to a compromise on expanding charter schools beyond the districts that they already reside in. Like you mentioned, the administrative costs to doing so would prove astronomical, especially for those small districts. That said, innovation is important in education. We need to expand innovation in our public schools. We need to be looking for models that are working across the nation to reinvigorate the school systems. We need to be searching for smaller class sizes and solutions to make that more affordable for school districts, while also making sure that our teachers who deserve a pay raise get it. So magnet schools is one way of doing that are still part of the district and aren't necessarily charter. That's one option, and a potential compromise, but I can't see supporting expanding charter schools to new districts.
Thank you, Drew. And Patty, the same question to you. Is there compromise? What compromise or what solution would you bring to the conversation of charter schools?
Yes, thank you, Zach. Here in District 25, families like to have the choice, but I strongly believe we need to focus on transparency, accountability, and equal standards when it comes to addressing education for our kids. I do not support expanding charter schools across the state. I think we need to focus on the schools we have today and focus on improving them. I've been working with folks from the Kansas City Public School Board as well as from the Center School Board to learn what can I do as state rep. The biggest issue is that we are not fully funding our schools. The current foundation formula is nowhere near fully funding our schools, and we continue to see cuts in the school transportation budget. And I'm pleased to share with you that I'm the only candidate in this race who has been endorsed by the Missouri NEA and Better Schools for Missouri because of my commitment to education.
Thank you, Patty. You actually beat Angela to the end there, so well timed, well timed. Now, the final question to you both, and Patty, we'll start with you, is the Chamber has supported several transportation funding plans over the years, and transportation has, like the conversation of charter school expansion, has just been a continual conversation within the state. What are we going to do? Give your thoughts on what a funding plan might look like that would address the infrastructure needs of the state.
Yes, thank you, Zach. The Missouri transportation system is the 7th largest highway system in the nation, yet it ranks 48th in revenue per mile. Our crumbling infrastructure and bridges are dangerous, and we have to address it. With inflation and increased miles per gallon vehicles, we need to get creative with our solutions, and we need to do so quickly. Since our fuel tax is one of the lowest in the country, I think it's time we revisit it. And we must message to the community the importance of it. A small increase would be a starting point at addressing our dangerous infrastructure.
And Drew, when it comes to transportation funding, what kind of a plan do you think would be best for the state?
Yeah, we need to raise it, and we need to raise it fast. It's not something we need to revisit. It's something that we need to act on as soon as possible. We need to see a raise in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 cents per gallon. Luckily, we've been enjoying low gas prices. This would have been an excellent opportunity for us to raise the gas tax. Gasoline vehicles are also getting more fuel efficient, and new vehicles are coming onto the road that don't use gasoline at all. We need to examine other ways of funding our roads and bridges, such as using a mileage tax. That's one way that other states are making up for that difference in fuel efficiency and lack of fuel at all. We also need a regional transportation authority that has the taxing power so that we can provide affordable mass transit to the Kansas City area. So I definitely support working with the ATA to make that a reality at the state level.
Thank you, Drew, and Patty, both for answering our questions from our Government Affairs Committee. And this is a great time. I should have reminded everyone a bit earlier, but don't forget to add your questions for Patty and Drew tonight before their time ends. One question that I might ask is, we saw this past session, well, we have coming up the conversation of I'm so sorry, Clean Missouri, and bringing that back to the ballot. What is your thoughts on bringing that back to the ballot, and how the legislature, how they went about bringing that to the people to reconsider a vote? Whoever would like to start.
I'll jump in here. It's pretty shameful that the legislature would so quickly overturn the will of the voters, but I'm not particularly surprised given what the Republican supermajorities have done over the last 10 years. Each time we pass progressive ballot initiatives at the statewide level. As an attorney, I look forward to fighting for clean and fair maps, for increased access to the ballot box. We need to do everything we can to make sure that people have access to the vote. It's our single greatest civic duty, voting. And it's not enough that voters have the opportunity to vote. It shouldn't be that politicians can pick their voters. I've heard stories of elected officials who are consulted when they're redrawing the maps, which will be done in the next 2 years. And I want no part of that. I don't want anyone running by what my district might look like in 2022. Politicians should not pick their voters. Voters should pick their politicians. So I look forward to voting down Dirty Missouri. We're going to vote no on Amendment 3, and we're going to fight for increased access to the ballot box, more fair elections in any way we can achieve it, and greater voter registration.
Thank you, Drew. Patty?
Yeah, thank you, Zach, for the question. It's disgraceful what they've done. In fact, Clean Missouri is something I spent countless hours on working on from the ballot initiative process. You may have seen me outside the grocery store collecting signatures. Then once it finally made it to the ballot, I worked tirelessly canvassing and phone banking to see that it got passed, because I believe strongly in transparency and drawing fair district lines. And, you know, it's disgusting that they are destroying the will of the people, putting it back on the ballot. And I believe we will vote down Dirty Missouri come November.
Thank you both. I had to double check to make sure I wasn't muted. Well, I am looking at our time here, and we appear to be at the end of our time for District 25. And so I want to thank both Patty Lewis and Drew Rogers for their time and answering our questions and joining us tonight. So a virtual round of applause, I guess we will do that. And thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zach. Thanks, Vicki. Thank you, Angela.
Yeah, thank you all.
All right. Next, we are looking at District 26. And we have with us, running in that seat, we have Jamie Braden, who will be is running against Ashley Bland Manlove. And so one thing that I will kind of go over if you didn't catch it earlier is that we will give you, we will give you 2 minutes to introduce yourselves and just kind of talk about some issues that are important to you. And following that we have some questions from the Government Affairs Committee that we will then ask both of you, going back and forth. And you will have about a minute to answer those questions as well. And then following, and I want to remind everyone, please put your questions in the chat box. I think I'm pointing in the right direction. And we'll ask those towards the end, time permitting. So I guess we'll start with Representative Ashley Bland Manlove to introduce herself and tell us what's important as she runs for this August 4th primary.
Well, Mr. Sweets, thank you for that introduction. Thank you for inviting me and to the chamber. My name is State Representative Ashley Bland Manlove, and I represent the 26th District in Kansas City, Missouri. I am born and raised in Kansas City, went to St. Teresa's, Lincoln College Prep, and then went away to college for a while, went to join the military for a while. So I was an intelligence analyst, held a top secret clearance. That's enough about me. Why I run and why I do this. I come from a long lineage of community servants, either from military or education or policy standpoint and kind of non-for-profit. So I've been raised as a young child to to enjoy the process of civic engagement. I apologize. And so I've been knocking on doors and passing out literature since I was about 14, and very engaged in just trying to get people to understand why civic duty and engagement is important. Some of my platform issues are voters' rights. I have carried for the last session, the 100th General Assembly, I carried the automatic voter registration bill. I also, now for this special session, I'm in Jefferson City right now, and we are doing a special session on violence, finally. And so I have reintroduced my bills on excessive, they're called magazines, but ammunition feed is into weapons. No more ammunition hold than 10. Also, VOCA funding and making sure that people who are victims of crime are able to receive the mental health benefits that they are entitled to address the trauma. I also advocate strongly for education and
Representative, I see the time's up is popped up. No, we appreciate it. We do appreciate it. There will be time. Actually, we do have a question about education, and so in some of our questions to follow, there'll be time for both of you to kind of expand a bit on your issues that are important to you. But we'll go now to Jamie Braden, and she's with us. Please, Jamie, introduce yourself to the fine folks at home and let us know a little bit about why you were running and what's important to you. Oh, I believe you're muted.
Yep, got to learn that one. I want to thank you guys for inviting me to be a part of this. I come to this job as a person who's spent over 30 plus years teaching in the Kansas City, Missouri School District. Not only have I done the district, I was born, raised, graduated, even have come back and done graduate work, being a part of this community. Being a child whose original upbringing was in the Catholic education, I was taught social justice. We were always taught to give unto others, not for others just to give to us. We had to give back. So for me, I have a personal place in this. It's the kids I work with. It's the kids I have known. It's the kids who are now adults. And when I get to meet their kids coming to my schools, I'm like, oh my goodness. And then all I hear the parents say is, Miss Jamie, just please make sure by the end of the year, the one thing they can do the most is know that they are loved. And I'm like, no problem, as long as I get to love them my way. And as always, my parents are like, love them just like you loved us. I believe that we have to have stronger education to have a stronger community. We have to work in mental health and physical health. We need to be respectful of our elders in the community because they hold the secrets. They hold the secrets to what we need to know. I'm the mother of 2, the grandmother of 4, and I am a great-grandmother, and I'm very active in my church. I believe in just helping people so we can all learn to help each other. That's me.
Thank you, Jamie. Let's go ahead and dive right in. And well, actually, Jamie, we'll start with you with the first question, and then we'll allow Representative Manlove to answer the same question. But what actions do you think that the state should take that would be most effective in reducing cities' sharply rising homicide rates?
I think one of the things that we as leaders in our community, we have to provide more information. Sometimes a little transparency is not going to hurt anybody. Sometimes they need to have a better understanding when you're talking about the numbers and where are these numbers coming from. Sometimes we need to be able to educate communities just a little better. It's the simple things that communities may not know. I would say we also need to partner with the agencies, especially agencies that deal with violence like AIM for Peace, and also medical industries such as behavioral health, mental health, because sometimes those are the issues that provide us with gun violence.
Thank you, Jamie. And Ashley, the same question to you. You had mentioned you're actually in for special session. What measures do you think, and you touched on it a bit earlier, do you think would be the most effective for the state?
Well, actually, the issues that I think would be most effective are not the issues that we're addressing in special session. In special session, we're kind of talking about superficial issues and over policing, and I don't think that that's the way to fix a community. Throughout the whole diaspora, the African American community has been disproportionately funded and invested in, and until we make a change there, in the way that we create policy and making sure that people are only judged by their character and not the color of their skin, we won't be able to see the changes. But I would love to see change, therapy for families, how to communicate, how to bank properly, reinvesting in our schools, and stop taking away so much TIF money from our schools that our schools aren't adequate. I could ramble on for this for days, but there's lots of policies. And I just hope that my counterparts on the other side of the aisle actually start to listen to some of those requests that we're making.
Thank you. The next question that we have, and Representative, we'll stay with you to start, is given the dire needs of both the physical and the behavioral health care needs in these times especially, what is your position on Amendment 2 and why?
Well, I am definitely a yes on 2. Just got my yard signs. If you talk to teachers, teachers tell you that kids can't pay attention in schools. Therapists will tell you that kids can't pay attention in schools unless they're getting a good sleep at night, they're in a safe place, and they have food, and they're healthy. I heard a statistic talking to one of my schools. Most of her kids lost days actually because of asthma. So it is imperative that we get those 60,000 kids that the governor kicked off of Medicaid back onto Medicaid, and then add as many people as we can, because we can't be a healthy society and function properly if we're not. Plus, there's also some budget implications from Fed money that could free up other general revenue so that we can invest in schools and roads and other issues mentioned before.
Thank you. Jamie, same question to you. Amendment 2, the expansion of Medicaid in the state, what is your position on that and why?
It's a yes for Medicaid. It's a yes because it's necessary. It's a yes because, as a former educator, children do have these issues, but that's because they're taking on adult problems. They see their parents sometimes being really stressed, really losing it, and they in turn are trying to figure out, what can I do? At 7, 8, you can't do anything. But if Medicaid expansion comes in, guess what? If we have healthy parents, we'll have healthy children, which makes a healthy community, which helps healthy businesses, which makes the state better. All I can say is Medicaid expansion will help both on the physical, the behavioral side, and then everybody's child, all children, will feel better about themselves, their schools, and their families.
Thank you, Jamie. Before we get to our next set of questions, I just want to remind everybody to add some questions to the chat. The chat box for me is over here. Maybe it's over there for you. And but just take a minute and throw your question in the chat, and we'll make sure that we can ask those at the end. We have 2 more questions from the Government Affairs Committee, so there's plenty of time. We'll stay here with you, Jamie, and we're going to move to the issue of education. Both of you have talked about children in our time here, but we see that there is continual effort in the state to expand charter schools in districts both outside of Kansas City and St. Louis. And while it does provide benefits, certainly has benefits of innovation and educating our students in the state, we see that it can lead to duplication of overhead and administrative costs, and for both rural and urban districts. But we also see that there's just not a large enough tax base in every part of the state where some of these expansion efforts are taking place. This is a conversation that always seems to be in front of the legislature. What compromise would you support on this conflict?
I think the compromise in itself is going to have to come from us, Missourians. As a person in a leadership position, I've known for a fact, Kansas City hasn't voted on a new tax base for their schools in over 20 years. So whatever the last tax base was, that's what the money is based off of. We have to be able to, number one, we have to educate our parents. Once again, town hall meetings, whatever you want to call them, parent meeting, they got to be educated. Therefore, vote for a school tax base. Innovation is not new. That's what magnet schools were before the magnet programs were dissolved. Helping parents understand that every school might not fit your child, but every school is looking out to do the best for your child. Sometimes money doesn't mean anything. Sometimes it's about those people in there who care for your children.
Representative Manlove, same question to you. We're looking at the conversation of charter expansion outside of Kansas City and St. Louis. What is your possible solution or compromise for this question?
Right. So, okay, I'm not muted. Okay, great. So we actually discussed this last session, and I said in budget while we talked about Doug Ritchie's bill for charter school expansion. I don't have the luxury of saying I don't support charter schools because 8 of my schools are charter schools. I have what we call charter school row. So I have dug into these schools, and I know that the administration really cares. So I think that we should, we don't need to expand it because the rest of the districts don't need it. It's about population. So we don't need to expand it, but we do need to make sure that our charter schools here are held accountable. I'd love to see our charter schools brought back under the school district that they are in as a point of accountability based on tax dollars. There's a lot of negotiation, but it's really about the kids and what the kids can get from it.
Thank you. Thank you both. In the final question, and again, I'll remind everybody to throw in your questions before we finish with the chamber questions, but the last question that we'll have for you both, and we'll start with Representative Manlove and end with Jamie here, is the chamber has supported and encouraged a transportation funding plan for the state for years. And transportation seems to be, like charter schools, a question and a conversation that comes up every legislative session. Give us your thoughts on what a funding plan could look like for the state of Missouri.
Well, I was fine with the raising of the gas tax. I think that was in 2018. We tried, I think that was Proposition D, because we do have the lowest gas tax in the country. And I don't think that it is fair that the corporations get to be in Missouri with a low corporate tax and then get to drive their diesel trucks all up and down our highways with the low gas tax. That's not fair. So I still support raising the gas tax. I don't think that we're at a point yet to where electric cars are that vast to where they would take away from that. Most people still have gas cars. And I know people don't like the thought of raising a gas tax, but you have to think of it as investing in our community, because that revenue could go to a lot of things, whether it be education or actually funding the roads, as we don't have an actual source dedicated for that. So there are options out there, and I'm willing to listen to all of them.
Jamie, same question to you. Your thoughts on what a funding plan could look like for transportation in the state?
I am aware that there are some states that do have this transportation funding. depending upon what's the basic route that is being used all the time. I think there's something that entitles where if we were traveling from Kansas City to St. Louis, somewhat, I guess, like a toll bridge type of situation. I know that's a hard thing for people to look at times, but for some of us, I can remember when the Paseo was a toll bridge. And now it's just the bridge you go back and forth to North Kansas City. So it has its place, but I do believe in the gas tax, and I think that's the beginning. And it is something that we have to seriously look at to maintain our highway and our everyday streets in the city, because those 18-wheelers come up and down certain busy streets. So yeah, we got to work on it, all of us together.
Thank you. One question that we do have here is this past session, there was some legislation that session kind of got cut short with COVID. So some legislation was rolled into some other bills. And one of the issues with one of those bills that was sent to the governor's desk is the issue of changes to TDDs, transportation districts, and CIDs and community improvement districts. What is your position on making changes in the state on what we allow those TDDs to do and how those are structured? Either one, feel free to jump in.
Well, we always scream local control until it's until it's an issue that's actually about local control. You know, the people who live in that municipality taxing district know what can be afforded in that taxing district. And when the state comes in as oversight, sometimes they miss details. So I believe that a district should be able to tax what the district votes for. I think that one was a special tax for one city, maybe Springfield or somewhere down there. And they asked the state to let them create this special tax so that they could fund infrastructure that they needed. And I think that that's totally fine. I'm totally fine with that. I don't think that there are certain state taxes, but I think that should be left up to a local control issue.
Thank you. Jamie?
So I'm gathering, can you explain to me what did you tell me, TPD or C?
Yeah, the CID, so these are the community improvement districts and TDDs, okay. Transportation development districts that are based off of tax revenue in the area that is dedicated towards something. And CIDs could be for sidewalks, they could be for other things. And as the representative mentioned, there are some TDDs that are for infrastructure projects and maintenance as well.
Okay. Once again, I think that's something that's already established in Kansas City. Any tax that comes up on our ballots, Kansas Cityans have to vote for it. So if Kansas Cityans don't understand what they're voting for truly or how it's going to help them, then we don't see the increase. Sometimes not providing knowledge, once again, providing informational halls, town halls, forums, so people will understand prior to the ballot coming out. Because we can say yes to something and then it doesn't work for us. So people need to have a clear understanding. We in education always says, we're great at using letters. We'll know what the letters mean. SLD, EDD, MRs, but everybody else doesn't. So sometimes, just like apparently in government, we need to make sure people understand what is it you're asking of me and how does it work for me? Because if it's not something that I've been given a foreplay on or understand what's going on, then I'm just gonna say, it doesn't sound good. No, I don't want that. And in the long run, I'm hurting everything because we are very much aware in Kansas City, our streets need to be repaired and some people actually need sidewalks. They don't even have sidewalks. So yeah, communities need to be able to have the right to do something sometime, but communities also need to be knowledgeable of what it is.
Well, that's all the time that we have for both for the 26th district. And so I want to thank Jamie Braden and Representative Ashley Bland Manlove for your time ahead of this election and joining us to share with us your thoughts and where you are on the important issues to South Kansas City and the region, really. So thank you both for joining us. I've been doing this as my virtual applause. So you both did a fantastic job. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have the 36th district. And I see that we have 2 of the 3 folks with us. We might have the third join. Yep, there's the third. So we are moving now to the 36th district. And that district, we have Republican Nola Wood joining us tonight. And on the Democratic side, we have Mark Sharp, Representative Mark Sharp, and Laura, please do not be upset, Loyakano?
Loyakano.
Loyakano. Excuse me.
A lot of vowels, I know.
So I was practicing before too, I promise. So thank you, all 3 of you, for joining us tonight. And just real quick recap, we're going to allow you 2 minutes to introduce yourself, talk about what's important, and then we're going to move into some questions from the Government Affairs Committee. 4 questions that they have already determined that's most important to both chambers. And then also at the end, if we have some time, we'll allow for some questions and answers from the chat. So please, if you're at home, don't forget the chat box to add in your questions as we kind of go along. I'm sure there will be some times where you might want to hear more about a specific issue. So without further ado, Nola, would you please kick us off?
Sure. Thank you, Zach. I appreciate this so much. And I am running for state representative. I'm very concerned about the top issues in a lot of people's minds: healthcare, education, and economic policies impacting our families and our livelihoods. As a mom, a small business owner, and an insurance agent specializing in health insurance, I have seen a lot of very sad unintended consequences of many policies that we were all told were the only way to do things. And as a grassroots activist in the city, I've sadly sat through some community meetings where some elected representatives told us things that I knew were not correct. Sadly, a lot of good, well-intentioned people have been misinformed by people we should have been able to trust. So I'm committed to push back against big government overreach and burdensome red tape to promote common sense practices that will help us do what's right for our families and community. Of course, the healthcare issue is one that impacts everyone, and I have seen, as the former president of the Greater Kansas City Association of Health Underwriters, I have seen that what we need is more healthcare freedom, not more big government cookie cutter schemes. And I have raised 3 children. We went through a devastating time of trials several years ago, but I learned a lot more than I ever dreamed I needed to know about mental health. And I know from our community here too, that there are many people who would be amazed how many families live in fear of their seriously mentally ill family member. And so I believe there are some things that we can do to bring better solutions for those family members and the community. I would really appreciate anyone looking at my website, electnola.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Nola. Next, we'll go to Representative Mark Sharp. Mark?
Thank you, Zach. Yes, my name is Mark Sharp, and for anybody who I haven't met on this call, hopefully it's nice to meet you. Hopefully I'll get a chance to meet you in person someday. I am running for re-election for 36th District, and it's a pleasure to be on this phone call and to represent the district. A little bit about myself: actually born and raised in South Kansas City. Graduated from the Hickman Mills School District, came out in 2004. Was a teacher for 5 years before I was elected last November in a special election. And it's been a pleasure, and I am so humbled to be in this position. Last year, I was the only Democrat freshman to introduce a common sense gun legislation and had it voted out of committee with flying colors out of a vote 12-1. Last year in session, I did what I think was a pretty good job of establishing relationships with Republican leadership to make sure that the bills that we filed and the bills that we're trying to have for the working class and the working people of South Kansas City, those bills were heard. And I think because of those relationships I established in my freshman year, really puts me in a good position to come back next year and pick up on those bills that probably would have passed had it not been for the pandemic that we had to experience. One bill that I had moving was Blair's Law, which was named after a girl named Blair Shanahan Lane, who was killed in 2011 from celebratory gunfire. On 4th of July's and New Year's Eve's across the city, we all experience what really shocks us the entire night with all the gunfire that we hear in our backyards. So this would make it a state offense. And I think if it weren't for the pandemic, this bill wouldn't have. So I look forward to talking about reducing crime and making sure that our kids get back to school in a safe way and getting Hickman Mills back to fully accredited. Thank you.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Last but certainly not least, we have Laura.
Hi there. Nice way not to say my last name there, Zach. I'm Laura Loyacano. It's a nice Sicilian name there. I'm running for state representative, House District 36 here in South Kansas City. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you. I'm running because I think I have the right combination of skills and experience to represent the people of South Kansas City well. I have more than 30 years of public policy experience working at state, local, and national levels on a variety of important policy issues. And I have a lot of experience in working across the aisle. When I left Missouri to go back to Colorado and work for former Governor Dick Lamb, and then worked with the National Conference of State Legislatures for nearly 14 years, where I worked in legislatures around the country, across the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, to help bring good government and good policy making to the states, including Missouri. That position led me being recruited to Kansas City to work at the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, where I was brought in specifically to work with the Missouri legislature on a variety of issues, from public transportation to housing to early childhood development to K-12 education. I spent the last 21 years living and working in Kansas City, and working a great deal as a volunteer and professionally with our schools. I have significant experience working with the Hickman Center and Grandview School Districts, all part of the 36th district. And I've seen firsthand the way poor decision-making at the state legislature has adversely affected our community and especially our schools. And so again, some of the issues that are important to me are important to other people on this call: violence, education, and what we're going to do to get our economy up and running after COVID. I look forward to talking with you about more specifics in a moment.
Well, thank you all for that that really great introduction of yourselves and kind of giving us some more to understand about what's important to you. And we talked about it already. I think it was in a stream through everyone's introduction, but violent crime. And so our first question, we'll actually go ahead and we'll go backwards. And so we'll start with Laura. Laura, talk to us about what actions the state can take, should take, that would be most effective in reducing cities' sharply rising homicide rates.
Sure, that's a tough question. I know that the Missouri legislature is getting ready to go into special session. They've got a mixed bag of solutions. I don't think any of them, as has been said on the call before, are going to really get to the problems that we have. I guess just to state, I want to say it's important not just to be tougher on crime, but I think it's important to be smarter about crime. Obviously, putting more money into things like witness protection make a lot of sense. I hope they can find a way to pay for that during the special session. That's going to be tough, if not impossible. But I think that there are some common sense solutions that the legislature hasn't acted on. Common sense gun laws, background checks, red flag laws, and those sorts of things. But I also think there's some underlying causes that we can address. And there's a lot of people who are close to violence in our society, and they can end up either as a perpetrator or as a victim. And there are some things that we need to address in our schools, our housing policy, and the way we support people and helping them. Thanks.
Next, we'll go to Representative Mark Sharp.
Thank you, Zach. I have to respectfully disagree. I do think that some of these things that we're going to meet about in the special session do have a chance to have a huge impact. As we know, a couple of years ago, the Kansas City Police Department did a study, and it shows that there's a small percentage of people who are largely responsible for a huge portion of the crime in Kansas City. And right now, people are scared to come forward to talk. We have increased the reward fund, and I think after we pass the some bills here, the special session for, we'll also have more folks coming forward to speak once we have the witness protection program in place. So also witness tampering. Now I know that just increasing penalties isn't going to be enough, but we have to give people in the district, we have to remove that fear to come forward and speak, because without that, if we can get that to happen, we can start to see some of these folks taken off the streets, and we should be able to see that crime and homicide rate drop down to a level that where it should be, instead of seeing us at over 107 homicides so far and 15 homicides in South Kansas City so far this year. We are 35% ahead of where we normally are on a 4-year average. So I do think the witness protection program has the ability to have a huge impact on the crime that we have in Kansas City.
Thank you. Nola?
Thank you, Zach. The issues of the mentally ill community are a big part of our crime problem, and I believe that there are some common sense policies that some other areas of the country have enacted that could go a long way. I know that a friend who is a candidate for Jackson County prosecutor has insight on that. There are areas where we just have been overlooking the elephant in the room of repeat offenders, where the real problem is serious mental illness. Also, the lack of sufficient funding for the jail has been just a ridiculous issue. When in our neighborhood we hear of a crime committed and the person wasn't a serious enough offender to be retained, and so they turn them loose and they're back out at it. So I think we could do a lot better in these two areas to better protect our people.
Thank you, Nola. And one of the things that you at least started your answer with, you kind of hinted out, great segue into our second question, which is given our dire needs for both physical and behavioral health care, especially in these dire times, what is your position on Amendment 2 and why?
Well, thank you for asking. I have strong opinions on that. Again, as a health insurance professional, we have seen people, because of Obamacare and some of the burdensome red tape with that, we've seen people pushed into Medicaid who would have had private insurance and wanted to keep their private insurance, but because of the income guidelines on that, it was they were not allowed to. The problem with the Medicaid expansion, and there is a bigger problem with these ballot initiatives, is that it will put healthier people with higher income in line in front of truly disabled people for whom Medicaid was actually intended. And so I oppose Amendment 2. There is a better way to handle that situation. And basically, if we could push back against the overreaching, burdensome laws that came down from the feds, we could have some better answers very quickly. Thank you.
Representative Sharp?
Thank you. Yes, I support Amendment 2. Yes, on Amendment 2, please. I signed a petition earlier or last year to put it on the ballot, and I've been promoting the expansion of Medicaid ever since the beginning of me running and campaigning back in the special election in 2019. So there have already been 10 hospitals that have closed across the state, largely because a lot of the patients don't have the insurance to cover the bills. This is a 9-to-1 federal match through the Affordable Health Care Act, and I just think this is a no-brainer for us. We'll be, I believe, the 37th state to now expand Medicaid, and this is something that we should have done a long time ago. I'm hopeful that it passes August 4th, and we can see some real change with how Missourians are covered. Again, 230,000 Missourians this will impact and give them coverage, and 30,000 African Americans will have coverage through this. So this is a good thing.
And Laura, your position on Amendment 2?
I absolutely support the passage of Amendment 2 and Medicaid expansion. I think this is another example of a common sense approach to some revenue problems that we've had in Missouri for a long time, that unfortunately hyper-partisan bickering has not allowed us to take advantage of those federal dollars that are rightfully ours and belong back at home. I don't think it's a complete solution to our lack of health care. It doesn't address disparities that we see, especially in places like maternal and child health among African American women, but I think it's important and it's a start. Missouri may be the show me state, but I think it's other states, 37 other states, that have shown us that they need to expand Medicaid, and those dollars are important to us now more than ever in this economic downturn that we're having. We have got to pass that, and I do believe that it will pass, and I will be voting yes for it.
Thank you all for your response to that. And the next conversation that we're wanting to have is about education. And another conversation across the state is about expanding charters outside of Kansas City and St. Louis and different parts of the state. While we know that charters do have an innovative approach to education that can be helpful, we also know that they create duplication of administrative overhead that smaller districts, both rural and urban, simply do not have a tax base to support. What is a possible compromise or a solution that you would propose to resolve this conflict? And we'll start with Laura.
Hi, sure. Since charter school laws have passed more than 20 years ago now, I think we've seen some examples of what not to do. I mean, we've certainly seen some success. My own children attended the Kansas City, Missouri School District. I was an active parent and actively engaged in those schools. And I've seen firsthand about how the constant chipping away of resources meant for public education has hurt them. Charter schools don't have the same accountability and transparency as public schools do, and I think that's a big problem. But let me, we've already talked about duplication of services, buses coming up and down on the same streets that could be coordinated better. Let me offer one potential area of compromise, and that's we have 3 school districts here in House District 36, and they're all one high school districts. That gives them something in common with some of our rural districts. And we know in rural areas and in one high school districts like the 3 that we have, the charter schools would be economically devastating. So perhaps there's some areas that we can speak to rural legislators and bring up to them that they would have the same financially devastating effects in their communities.
Thank you. Representative Sharp?
Thanks, Zach. I used to work at a charter school within the KCPS school district before I was elected in November, last November, with the KIPP KC public charter school. So I can agree. They do have some different things that they do in the classrooms, and I saw some things that I liked, I saw some things that I didn't like. However, my heart is where I grew up, and Hickman Mills is where my heart is. So right now, my focus really is seeing the Hickman Mills School District become fully accredited, and then with the expansion of charter public schools into other districts outside of KCPS and St. Louis, I think the only compromise is that those public charter schools meet the same accreditation standards that our public schools are meeting. I think that is the compromise. Until then, if we start seeing some of these charter schools move into our districts, I think one thing that I'd be certainly afraid of is seeing our best students and some of our most engaging parents and families being siphoned off to some of these other charter schools. So right now, I am not for the expansion of charter schools into other areas.
And Nola, your position on the charter school expansion conversation.
Thank you. I support educational choice and educational freedom. I believe that parents should be the ones to decide what is the best educational setting for each child, because the cookie cutter big government red tape doesn't necessarily work. And we've seen that over the years, sadly. Personally, I'm a product of public and private schools, and I homeschooled my own children. There are a lot of issues around picking the right educational setting for the particular child and their particular needs. And I believe we need to free up the system. So I would like to see the expansion of charter schools.
Thank you. Thank you. Had to double check, make sure I wasn't muted. And finally, our fourth question, and Nola, don't go anywhere because we're gonna kick it off with you. The Chamber has supported and encouraged a number of transportation funding plans for the state of Missouri over the years. Transportation is a conversation that seems to never end. Give us your thoughts on what a funding plan would look like for the state.
Well, you're not diving into an area of my expertise, so I won't have much to say about this, but again, I know there are people who have studied the issue at greater length than I, and have a lot more to say about it. We do see an erosion, obviously, of the funding that was presumed when cars were using more gas and people were driving more. So we do need to re-examine the options. I know there is substantial opposition to making charging a toll. I lived in Kansas for years, and people didn't like having to pay the toll, but they do get used to it. There are a lot of serious questions that will need to be resolved.
Thank you. Representative Sharp?
Thanks, Zach. Well, Kansas City is in the middle of the country, obviously. So we have tons of heavy trucks from different companies just passing through Kansas City all the time, every day, passing through. And I'm not saying that our fuel tax needs to be higher overall, because I don't think that would pass. Again, I think Representative Manlove was talking about this earlier, and I believe that we have either the lowest or next to the lowest fuel tax, but maybe an increase in a diesel tax would be something that would be a little easier to pass, because let's be honest, the fuel tax that we have currently doesn't cover nearly as much of the damage that's being done to our highways and roads. So, and I don't think this would be the silver bullet to fix all of our transportation issues, but I do think that having a small and very moderate increase in maybe our diesel tax could help get some of our roads and highways and bridges back to the way they ought to be.
And Laura?
Well, I absolutely support an increased investment in our transportation infrastructure. Unfortunately, I think it's almost inevitable that with the current economic climate, that'll foster financial pressure and in an effort to plug holes in other areas of our budget we'll lose money that's currently dedicated to public transit, for example. And we just can't allow that to happen. Public transportation is absolutely critical to every metropolitan area, but in Kansas City, it is critical, especially South Kansas City, given our geography. People are dependent on public transit to get to work. Our older people and disabled people are completely dependent on a transit system, which is not working right now and is not funded the way it should be. And I really hope that we, as a city, that our congressional delegation and leaders can help and get those federal dollars back to where we were hoping that they could be. But I also think we do need to look to gas tax and other revenue generation to help fully fund our transit. We cannot make it in South Kansas City without an expansion of public transit. And I will work very hard for that if I'm elected. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Laura. And given the time constraint, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up the discussion in the forum here for District 36. So I want to thank everybody, Representative Mark Sharp, Laura Loyacano, closer, and Nola Wood tonight for joining us. And thank you all.
All right. Thank you, Zach.
We're going to move next into District 37, where we have with us Annette Turnbull, and I believe, yes, and we also have, so Annette Turnbull is the Democratic candidate, and joining us also is John Boyd Jr., who is the Republican candidate for District 37. So again, real recap, we'll give you 2 minutes to introduce yourself, talk about what's important, and then we'll kind of go into our Government Affairs Committee's questions that we have prepared. So actually, we'll go ahead and start with John.
Looks like John got bumped.
Okay, well, while we bring John back, Annette, do you want to go ahead and get started?
Sure, that'd be fine. Hello all, I'm Annette. It's an honor to be here with you guys tonight. I want to thank South Kansas City and Grandview Chambers for hosting this event and giving us the opportunity to speak to the community. Hopefully everybody's out there in chat on board. I want to thank John Boyd for his participation. Good to see you, John. It's been a while. I was born and raised in Grandview, and I'm a product of Grandview schools. My parents started the Jackson County Advocate newspaper in Grandview back in 1952, where I worked for 26 years. I have served as the alderman in Ward 2 for over a decade in the city of Grandview. I'm the president of the Grandview Historical Society, the secretary of the Grandview VFW 8100 Auxiliary. I'm a member of the Grandview Chamber of Commerce, and I'm a member of the Grandview Lions Club. My entire life has been dedicated to service. I've served on local boards and commissions, local nonprofits, and I currently work to find seniors who have a need for food, home services, yard cleanup. I would drop anything at a moment's notice to help our residents. My top priorities in the legislature would be improving health care for our seniors and adopting Medicaid expansion if voters don't pass it next week, fully funding our schools and fighting for teacher pay raises, and passing a prescription drug monitoring program so that we can address the opioid epidemic plaguing our state and our communities. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Annette. John, you are back with us. Would you like to give your introduction and talk about issues important to you? I think we're having mic issues. John, are you still with us? Okay. So here's what we'll go ahead and do, Annette. We'll allow you to answer the first question that we have, and we have a time limit of about a minute. So the first question, and then we'll jump to John and let him do the same. The first question is, what actions do you think the state should take that would be most effective in reducing our city's sharply rising homicide rate?
Well, there are 1.2 guns for every American in the US. We will never be able to fully prevent criminals from having access to firearms. However, we can take steps to reduce the availability of guns, to violent criminals and the mentally ill. The reality is that the assault weapons ban in the 1990s was an effective deterrent to gun ownership. I support common sense reforms that would place restrictions on high capacity magazines and the military style assault rifles. I think this is the least we can do. We need to increase training requirements for police and increase resources to police so that we're hiring better trained homicide detectives and giving the police the resources they need to investigate violent crime. Preventative measures also need investment. Community policing has been shown to be an effective deterrent of violent crime. If we properly and fully fund our police departments and implement some common sense measures to curb military-style weapons, we all have the resources that we need to tackle the increasing homicide rate in the Kansas City metro. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Thank you. No, you were right on time. Thank you, Annette. We're going to go ahead and continue with the questions, and then we get John back, we'll hop on over. The next question that we're curious, the Chamber Government Affairs Committee is curious to hear your response on is, given the dire needs of the physical and behavioral health in these times, what is your position on Amendment 2? I think you had hinted at it in your opening.
Yes, I support Amendment 2, and I will be voting next Tuesday for it. I encourage everyone else to do the same. It's immoral that 352,000 Missourians don't have access to health care. The fact that we are leaving $15.5 billion on the table each year when we consistently face budget shortfalls is fiscally irresponsible. I unequivocally support Medicare expansion. That's it.
Unmute speaker.
All right, thank you. The next question that we have for you is regarding education. And when we're looking at the conversation of expanding charter schools beyond Kansas City and St. Louis, we know that charter schools have an innovative approach to education that works, that can work, but also we see that they create a duplication of administrative overhead that smaller districts, both rural and urban, simply don't have a large enough tax base to support. So what kind of compromise or solution would you propose to resolve this conflict?
Well, I personally feel that every child should have access to the same quality education, no matter where they live. Charter schools have an unfair advantage in the way that they are funded. I'm a proud product of the Grandview public school system, and I support our public schools and our teachers. As your state representative, I will work hard to fully fund schools and make sure that all of our schools have the resources they need. My solution to this conflict is to not expand charter schools outside the Kansas City and St. Louis areas where they have been effective in raising test scores and increasing academic performance. We need increased transparency and uniform standards to measure and monitor charter schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. And we'll go ahead and just ask you the final question, then we'll hop on over and join John. But the final question that we're curious to hear your response on is about transportation. So the chambers have encouraged and supported efforts for a statewide funding plan for several years, and this is not a new conversation in the state. Give us your thoughts on what a possible funding plan could look like.
Okay, well, for starters, Missouri has the 8th worst infrastructure in the country. 12% of our bridges are structurally deficient. We have got to do something to address our crumbling roads and bridges. However, I do not support a regressive gas tax that would disproportionately affect the poor. Grandview has a transportation tax that has allowed us to maintain our roads and bridges well, but the state as a whole needs to take steps to fix this problem. I think looking at turning sections of I-70 into a toll road is probably the best solution to the problem, as it would lessen the burden on the residents of Missouri and transfer the most of the burden to the over-the-road truckers and tourists driving through. Those using the roads would be the ones paying for it. This is most equitable solution.
Thank you, Annette. And I just want to take a moment to remind everyone, if you have questions, to put it in the chat box. But we'll move over now to John Boyd Jr. John, are you with us still?
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay now?
Absolutely, absolutely. Welcome. If you could give us about a 2-minute introduction of who you are and what's important to you, what issues are important and why you're running.
Sure. Thank you so much, you guys, and everybody's responsible for this. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and present myself to our voters and the people in our community. I was born and raised here in Grandview, just like Annette. We know a lot of the same people. She was even really good friends with my father before he passed away in 1984. So we do still have a core group of a really good community of people here. And so I'm really excited to, as we go forward, to present the people with two really good candidates. And, you know, of course, if I've done my job, I'll prove to them what I believe is that I'm the best candidate. And I graduated in 1997, having spent kindergarten through 12th grade here in Grandview schools. It's not a very common thing anymore, you know. A lot of people that I started school with and moved out of town, their families move. So it's not very common that you get to stay in the same town and go all through school. And I'll echo what Annette had said earlier, and we have a really great education system here in Grandview, and they're doing some really great things to make sure that that we represent our community well when it comes to education. After high school, I joined the United States Air Force, where I served overseas and here at home before being honorably discharged out of Whiteman Air Force Base. It's one of the great things that I loved growing up was the aircraft, and I always knew my path was going to lead that way. Other than that, I never really had an interest in politics until I decided that I needed to do more and be involved more in helping shape policy and protect those that need protecting in our communities, such as the unborn and the elderly and the disabled. So with that, I decided to step up and step forward and do what I can to affect change for a positive outcome.
Well, thank you, John, for that. And we'll go ahead and move on to our questions. Got about a minute for those questions. And the first one is actually related to crime, violent crime. And what actions do you think you would support or encourage that could be the most impactful policies that the state could enact to address our city's sharply rising homicide rate?
Well, I think I have a problem inherently with the question in itself because it implies that the state needs to provide the solution to our local problems. And I think it is a matter of locality. I think we need to hold our city council accountable and our mayor accountable for their policies that create this atmosphere in our city. As Annette said, you know, when there's a gun legislation passed and the numbers went down in ownership, that's because law-abiding citizens follow laws, but criminals do not. So making more laws and policies against law-abiding gun owners isn't going to solve that problem. I think ultimately what it always comes back to is us as a community building bridges, working together, and caring about each other. And that's going to be a solution for most any problem we have in our communities, is coming together and solving it locally rather than relying on the government, whether it be at the state or federal level, to solve our problems for us.
And moving on to issues of healthcare, given the dire need, honestly, of physical and behavioral healthcare, give us your thoughts, your position on Amendment to Medicaid expansion, and how you came to that position, your position.
Sure. You know, when you look at something like this, when you're looking at Medicaid expansion or just healthcare in general, first you have to acknowledge the two problems we have. One is that there is not enough affordable health care provided to our communities that are in need. The other part of the problem is not having enough funding to fund what we want to do. So that's a problem we're going to have to work together to solve. As I talk to local chiefs of police, that's a problem that they face all the time when dealing with domestic violence issues and other problems in the community, where they're being asked to tend to somebody's mental health crisis when they are not the most prepared or trained people to handle that particular issue. And I think we need to look more at the mental health aspect as well as physical health, and as far as providing for those things. But as far as the Medicaid expansion, that's not going to solve the problems that we need to solve without creating a problem of a shortfall of funding for that program. So unfortunately, we can't expand because we don't have the money for it. But it is a problem we do need to find a solution to. And like I said before, as a community, more locally, and within our own state, we need to find a solution to those problems because it is something that needs to be taken care of.
Yeah, thank you. Talking about our communities, actually, there's always a conversation about expanding charter schools in communities outside of Kansas City and St. Louis. And this is an issue that we know brings about some passions, and we know that charter schools have some innovative approaches to education, but we also know that they create a duplication of administrative overhead that districts, both rural and urban, smaller districts, simply don't have a tax base necessarily to support. What kind of a compromise, a solution would you propose to resolve this conflict?
Well, I think when I looked at the question, and I don't have it in front of me, but I think part of the problem is we talk about the duplicity of administrative costs. Well, if the administration costs are so high that that's our problem, then I think we need to look at how much we're paying administrators and how much we're not actually spending on the education of our youth. I'm a strong proponent of public education. Sorry, I didn't come and call. You guys still with me?
Yes.
Okay. So I love our school system, but not every school system is Grandview CSD4. And so I look at different districts that end up paying their administrators hundreds of thousands of dollars, basically to go away because they weren't effective and they've overpaid them, and now they paid them more money to go away. And that's funding that should have been spent in the education of our youth. So I think we need to support the school systems that are in place. I think we need to identify areas where we can cut waste. I've had locally here, I'm told that basically if they don't use funding, even if it's not always in the best way, that they're going to lose it for the next year. We need to get out of that mentality. And I've seen that in every level of government, because when it comes down to it, at the end of the year, they're taught if they don't spend their money, then it's not going to be appropriated for the next year. And we need to teach them instead to save that money, that if they need the increased budget the next year, that we will make sure it's there for them.
Thank you. Finally, when we're talking about budgets, actually, thank you for the segue. Talking about budgets, let's talk about transportation. And the Chamber has supported and encouraged a funding transportation plan in the state for years now. And the conversation hasn't necessarily, moved. Give us your thoughts on what that funding plan could look like to be updated for today's infrastructure needs that we have around the state.
Sure. I appreciate that question. I know that's something that's a lot of people are struggling with down in our legislature and trying to figure out and solve that problem. Last I saw, Missouri is 6th in the amount of miles of roads and transportation that we have, but we settle somewhere in the bottom half and how much money we spend per mile to build and maintain that. So there's obviously a gap between our funding and maintenance and the number of miles of transportation we have. One thing I think I noticed about politicians is they all seem to kind of be experts on everything, which isn't possible, so the best thing I can know is that I don't know everything. So in this area, I would love to learn more about the Chamber's plans and ideas in this area. I've also talked with some of my friends and colleagues that are in the legislature. There's just a few options that nobody likes, right? So we have to choose one, and we need to do the best one and go with it. I think a tax increase on fuel is inevitable. I know it's been proposed, and I think I heard it here from Representative earlier. It's just proposing it on diesel is not going to be an effective way to do it, because you're going to hurt our farmers and those involved in agriculture. So I think if it's going to be raised, it has to be raised across the board. Obviously, it's been put on the ballot and defeated. Nobody likes to pay tolls, but it has been an effective method in other states too. So again, it's one of those ones where we're just going to have to bite the bullet, come up with the best plan we possibly can, and put it in place, and just get it done.
Thank you very much, and thank you both for joining us. And our time is up for District 37, but we want to thank Annette Turnbull and John Boyd for joining us tonight and sharing your thoughts on these important issues to the Chamber. So thank you both.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks for the opportunity, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Have a great night. Now, next we turn to our final district of the evening, and District 56. And with us tonight, we have Republican candidate Chip Anderson for District 36 House Representative. Chip, thanks for joining us. Oh, I think you're muted. Still Still muted there. Well, this would be a great time to remind everybody at home that we are accepting questions in our chat box. So please don't forget to add anything if you have a question for Chip as we go through these series of questions. Chip, are you?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
all right.
great. Thank you all for providing this opportunity for us.
Yes, and thank you for joining and participating. Chip, we're gonna get right into it and allow you 2 minutes to introduce yourself, talk about issues that are important to you in your candidacy here, and then we'll jump right on into some questions from the Chamber's Government Affairs Committee. What do you think?
Very good. Okay, I'm 68 years old, and I retired about 2 years ago after 40 years in the financial services industry. I was born and raised here in South Kansas City, and I've lived my entire life in the Kansas City area. My wife and I live in Cass County, and I've been married for 45 years. I've got 2 children and 3 grandchildren, and thank goodness they're all here in the Kansas City area so we can see them on a regular basis. Some of the areas that I'd like to focus on certainly is fiscal responsibility. With my background in the financial services area, I've learned that there's not a lot of people in Jeff City with my background. So that's a key area of focus for me. The other is Missouri's infrastructure in regards to the roads and bridges. As you've heard probably from some of the other candidates, that's an important area for Missouri that translates to revenue. If we can bring people to the state of Missouri to do business, that certainly will help us with the shortfalls that we're facing in revenue. And the third thing is Missouri's natural resources. You know, the Lake of the Ozarks in general, and a lot of the areas around our state are extremely important to us, and preserving Missouri's natural resources in an effort to bring more business to the state is very important for me. I was born and raised, and I've been involved in the outdoors all my life and love the areas here in Missouri, so that's a key thought for me.
All right. Thank you very much, Chip. We'll go ahead, and you actually alluded to a few questions that we'll touch, and one of them being transportation and talking about budget. So we'll flip the questions around here in the order and ask you that, and let you know that the Chamber fully supports and has supported various transportation funding plans in the state. And they've done that for years. So give us your thoughts on what a funding plan might look like for the state in terms of transportation and infrastructure.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think the one has been challenging for us for a long time, which possibly is why the updates and the maintenance on the roads and bridges in our area, in our state, haven't been taken care of like they should. There's been questions about a fuel tax and how that might affect the lower income people, although a user tax like a fuel tax is extremely important as a source of revenue to improve the roads. Bringing new businesses, putting together a committee to bring new businesses to Missouri for additional tax revenue would be important here, but that's back and forth because with poor roads, a lot of businesses don't want to come to Kansas City. We need to do something to improve it because, as everybody knows, it's no secret, the roads and bridges in Missouri, and especially in the Kansas City area, need a lot of work.
Thank you for that, and they do. I hit a pothole just myself.
We all drive on them, yeah.
Yep. Chip, give us your thoughts on what the state could do what actions the state could take that might be the most effective in reducing our city's violent crime and rise in homicide rate.
That's a really important issue, and especially Mayor Lucas in Kansas City ran on that issue with the murder rate in Kansas City, and that was one of his top priorities. Frankly, I don't think that's as much the state's responsibility as the city, the mayor, and the city council. We need to address that. And while I'm not really in favor of the state helping, I would offer their support to help us. Governor Parsons is actually meeting in Jefferson City now on some of the issues they're trying to fix, and that's one of the things on the agenda. We need their help. We need more, not less, members of the police department. We need more training. We need more citizens' actions. We need a gun buyback program that we used to have in Kansas City, and we need to take a lot of the illegal guns off the street. This is something that Kansas City needs to fix. It's our problem here locally, and while we would welcome outside help from the federal or the state government, we need to fix this as a city.
Thank you. And given kind of the state that we find ourselves in terms of both physical and behavioral health care in these times, certainly, what would be your position on Amendment 2, the Medicaid expansion?
Well, on the surface and the way it's being presented to the voters in the state, I think it seems like a very positive opportunity to help with some of the physical and mental funding that we need in the healthcare. However, with our balanced budget that we have to have in the state of Missouri, that takes away from other important programs, transportation, education, and many of the other things. And there's already been tremendous budget cuts due to the COVID-19 issue that we faced in the pandemic. The cuts in revenue that the state is facing right now have cut programs. Just last month, I think Governor Parsons cut $130 million out of the education budget. So that is going to have an additional tax burden on the citizens in the state of Missouri if that issue passes. I'm all for more money for physical and mental health. However, that is not the way to do it, in my opinion.
And finally, it's a question of charter schools and charter expansion outside of Kansas City and St. Louis. And again, this is a conversation that we've been having for years, much like Medicaid expansion and transportation funding. We've had this conversation in the state legislature, and we see benefits from innovative practices from charter schools, but they also create duplication of administrative overhead that smaller districts in rural and urban areas simply don't have a tax base necessarily to support those schools. What kind of a compromise or a solution would you propose that would resolve this conflict?
That creates a unique challenge because rural districts, we know, don't have the tax base to support some of those programs. And we also know that in Kansas City and St. Louis, the charter programs have had some great success. But the simple fact is, there are areas in the state that for their school districts, they don't have enough students actually to support a lot of the main programs. If there was a way to do that, if collectively, excuse me, we could get education people to get involved in that and get ideas from those charter schools, that would be great. But it boils down to the simple fact that many of those districts in the rural areas and some smaller local schools do not have the funding for the basic needs they need right now, and not in addition to having additional money that they have to have for the charter schools. I'm all for it, and we can work towards that because I'm extremely concerned about the education process in our public schools.
Well, thank you, Chip, and thank you for your time. I don't see any questions in the chat box, so just want to say that we appreciate your time and joining us this evening.
Thank you for the opportunity, and if there's any questions that come up, I'm happy to help you with those.
Appreciate it.
Great.
Good night.
Zach, thank you so much for participating, and to all of our candidates for participating today. It's great to get to hear some of your input on some of the issues that the Chamber is concerned about. We are recording this, and it's going to be posted online, so if you know someone that missed the presentation, we'll get it up on our website and our Facebook page this afternoon. Be sure to join us tomorrow at 4 o'clock. We are going to feature the Senate Districts 7 and 9 and the candidates for that between 4 and about 4:45. So we'll have that information. If you don't already have the link, we'll have it posted on our Facebook page, and hope you can join us for tomorrow evening's forum. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Have a good night.